8 creepy true stories from summer camp. Every summer, thousands of kids go off to camp to swim in the lake, roast marshmallows, and tell ghost stories by the fire. But sometimes, the stories they tell around the fire are the ones that really happened. These are 8 creepy true stories from summer camp. The cabin counselor who never left. In 2009, a group of 12-year-olds attended Camp High Ridge in Vermont. The camp was famous for its massive lake and old wooden cabins that dated back to the 1940s. One of those cabins, Cabin 4, had been closed for nearly 10 years. The reason, as the story went, was because a counselor named Eli had disappeared one night after sneaking out for a swim. They never found his body. But that summer, because of an overbooking issue, the camp director decided to reopen Cabin 4. My cousin Kyle was one of the kids placed there. On the second night, Kyle said he woke up to the sound of someone whispering his name. He thought it was one of the boys messing with him, until he saw a shadow moving in the far corner of the room, tall, still, and wrong. The next morning, Kyle asked the counselor if anyone had come in during the night. The counselor turned pale and said no one had the key but him. That night, Kyle set up his phone to record. At 3:12 a.m., the video caught the sound of footsteps, slow, wet footsteps, and a man's voice whispering cold, so cold, before the camera abruptly shut off. The next morning, the counselor found the phone on the floor, soaked, but the cabin was bone dry. Camp High Ridge closed 2 years later. Cabin 4 is still standing, but the door is nailed shut. The lost girl in the woods. In 2016, a 14-year-old named Emma went missing at Camp Silver Falls in Oregon. Her cabin mates said she went for a walk after dinner to take pictures of the sunset and never came back. For 3 days, hundreds of volunteers searched the forest. When they found her phone, it was wedged into the bark of a tree. There were 5 pictures on it. The first 4 were normal: trees, sky, sunset. The 5th was a blurred photo taken in near darkness, but if you brightened the image, you could see her face, eyes wide, mouth open. And behind her, a tall, pale figure with its hands around her shoulders. They never found Emma's body, but every summer since, campers say they've heard crying deep in the forest near sunset, always just before it gets dark. The counselor's last shift. This story came from a man named Jason, who worked as a counselor in upstate New York in the early 2000s. On his last night before heading home, he volunteered for lake watch, basically making sure no kids snuck out for a midnight swim. Around 2 a.m., he saw ripples in the water. Someone was swimming. He grabbed a flashlight and shouted for them to come ashore. No one did. When he shined the light over the water, he saw a face looking back at him, pale, bloated, floating motionless. He called for help, but when the other staff arrived, there was nothing in the lake. The next morning, he found wet footprints leading from the water to the campfire pit, and stopping there. Jason quit the next day. He said he never forgot that face, because it looked exactly like his own. The screaming tent. A group of middle school girls were camping out in the backwoods section of Camp Eagle Rock in Colorado. Around 1 a.m., one of them started screaming. The counselors rushed to the tent, unzipped it, and found the girl curled in a ball, trembling, muttering. It was breathing next to me. The other girls said they'd been asleep when they heard something heavy pressing down on the tent from the outside, like a hand, dragging slowly from one end to the other. When staff searched the area with flashlights, they found large prints in the dirt, barefoot, but with claw-like impressions at the ends, and dozens of tree trunks with deep scratches, all pointing toward the girl's tent. The camp quietly fenced off that entire section of woods the next morning. The thing in the mess hall. At Camp Evergreen, there's a story the counselors tell only after dark. They say years ago, a storm knocked out the power during dinner. When the lights came back, one of the kitchen staff was gone. But some kids claimed they saw something moving behind the serving counter. Tall, hunched, its face half hidden behind long, dripping hair. The next day, police found the cook's uniform in the walk-in freezer, but no trace of him. The camp still operates, but the old mess hall is now locked and unused. Some say if you peek through the window at night, you can still see condensation on the glass, like something's breathing on it from the inside. The boy who wouldn't wake up. In 1994, a camper named Daniel didn't wake up for breakfast. They thought he was just sleeping in, but when the counselor tried to shake him awake, Daniel's eyes opened, wide, glassy, unblinking. He was breathing, but not responding. Paramedics said he was in a state similar to a coma. For 2 days, he lay there, motionless, except for one thing every night. His lips moved. The nurse swore she could hear him whisper something, over and over. When she leaned close, she realized what it was. He was saying a name. Eli, the same name as the missing counselor from cabin 4. Daniel recovered weeks later in the hospital, but when asked what he remembered, he only said, "He told me to stay quiet." The photo that shouldn't exist. A group of campers were playing around with a disposable camera one summer. When they got the photos developed, they found one they didn't remember taking. It showed their cabin, same night, same setup, but everyone was asleep. And there was someone standing in the corner, watching them. No one recognized him. No counselor fit the description. The camp tried to brush it off, but when the parents demanded answers, the camp director quietly refunded their money and refused to host kids in that cabin again. The whistle. The last story was submitted by a former camp nurse named Lydia. She said that every night around 3 a.m. she'd hear a faint whistle coming from the woods, always the same short, eerie tune. One night, she followed it. She walked past the cabins, through the trail, until she reached the lake. The moon was full, reflecting perfectly off the water. The whistling stopped. Then she saw movement beneath the surface, a pale shape rising slowly, a hand reaching out of the water, grasping the air. When she screamed and ran, she said she could hear footsteps behind her, wet, slapping footsteps, following her all the way back to her cabin. The next morning, her bed sheets were soaked, and outside her window, pressed against the glass, was a single wet handprint. She quit that day. Maybe it's the isolation. Maybe it's the woods. Or maybe some places are just never meant to be slept in again, because at summer camp, when the fires die down and the flashlights go out, the stories stop being just stories. And sometimes the ones who left come back to make sure you never forget them.